Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out to the third edition of Science on the Screen, AI themed. Tonight, we're going to watch Her, but before we do, we have a wonderful pair of guests with us this evening. We have Iris Howley from the Computer Science Department at Williams College. Iris is a human-computer interaction, artificial intelligence, and learning science researcher who focuses on enabling users to overcome obstacles to effective decision-making and community participation through the design of technologies. She's also teaching a course this spring on human and AI interaction. Jeremy Cohn is a associate professor in the psychology department. He received his PhD in social psychology from Cornell, and his research focuses on person perception, including impression formation and updating, as well as the nature of empathic responding, which will be pretty relevant for thinking about humans interacting with AI. So I thought the first question that I was going to ask both of you, and I'll start with Jeremy if that's all right, was just what is it about this film that is most interesting or intriguing to you, given your professional interests and focuses?
Yeah, so so in the film, you have this protagonist, Theodore, who is essentially going to fall in love with his operating system, right? So engaging in a romantic relationship with his operating system. And the thing that's so interesting about that from a psychological perspective, from my perspective, is thinking about, independent of whatever actual abilities this operating system has, this artificial intelligence, there's a question of how Theodore is coming to perceive the mind of this artificial intelligence and sort of the ways in which he comes to an understanding about the nature of her experience, whether that is her thoughts or intentions or beliefs, whether she's got hopes or dreams or worries or fears. And whether that's accurate or inaccurate is sort of beside the point. It's sort of the question of how he comes to the perception of that. Like, what are the cues that are actually being used in his interactions with her to be able to make those kinds of more nuanced decisions about the nature of her sort of mental experience and whether all of that is an illusion. And so we'll get into the details of that, of course, as we get going.
Oh yeah, we definitely will. Iris, what about you? Same question.
So when I was looking at our movie choices for this series, I chose this one particularly because out of all four of them, this is the one we feel closest to right now. So it's easier for me to understand what technology could get us from where we are now to what's in the movie. I've also done a lot of work on social presence of virtual agents in the past. And so we think a lot about just the sort of lower level conversational interaction between the OS, and it's a bot, but the OS and the user. And right now when you talk to things like ChatGPT, it has a very particular way of talking that is presented very differently in movies when you talk with an automated agent. So in this movie, in Iron Man, there's a lot of sort of similar-ish conversational agents that talk very differently than what we see right now. And a lot has to happen in order for us to get from where we are now to there. But that's part of what drove me towards that movie.
So this is interesting to me. And this is for both of you, what are the most salient features of how this AI, who names herself Samantha, interacts with Theodore, our human protagonist?
Yeah, one of the most noteworthy things is that she does not have any physical embodiment, right? So at every moment of the film, Theodore is interacting with Samantha through this earpiece. It's all voice, right? But that voice, I think one of the things you're going to feel is that the film permeates this kind of warmth. Like, you feel that warmth instantly because it has these kinds of human-like qualities in a way that's really different from the kind of 1970s Stephen Hawking monotone kind of voice computer interactions that sort of where all of this began, although maybe a little bit closer to the kinds of things that we see today, right? So, the question is how much of the ideas that Theodore has about this sort of perception of this AI, this artificial intelligence, is due to that fact, is due to this idea that she has like the only way that you're interacting with her is through this kind of like very human-like voice with very natural inflection and very sort of normal intonation and those sorts of ideas. It's just a very noteworthy feature of her existence.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, well, actually, I want to follow up because I don't want to turn you into just like technical side only, but you did say that you can sort of envision what it might take to get from where we are to the kind of AI that's represented in the film. But so can I ask you just like, what are the features that Samantha demonstrates that our current technology would really have trouble implementing, and why?
So one of the most sort of salient things that we're missing right now, I think, is notion of authority. So when you and part of this is on purpose because there's sort of a really, really big obstacle that's keeping us from getting to where Samantha is, and that has to do with liability and blame and what happens when things go wrong. But but some of this comes down to authority, right? As human beings, we're given rights and responsibilities. And that gives us a certain amount of authority to speak in spaces and feel like we know things. But our chatbots, our agents right now are not given that authority. I mean, some people might think they have some authority, but the minute you start talking about a contentious issue or something about race or religion, ChatGPT itself will back up and say, "Oh, I don't know." Or when it gets something wrong, it goes, "Well, that was Google Translate's fault." And so there's something with authority that we aren't yet giving or allowing our AI agents to have yet.
The one exception or an exception or something that sounds like it might be an exception that comes to mind is self-driving cars, where we put a lot of constraints on them, but we also do let them turn left and right and pass. But you'll notice that actually the major reason why we don't have self-driving cars right now is because of liability and insurance and blame. So we have given this small subset of testing self-driving cars that authority, but we don't want them on our roads yet because our human systems don't know how to deal with them having that authority. That makes sense. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question just about like outside of the content of what she's saying? Yeah, sorry. Is that better? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
We can lean more.
Yeah. So independent of the content of what she's saying, are there limitations with what we have right now in terms of like her intonation and her inflection and those sorts of things that are still like out of bounds at this point? Like she talks like a person, right? Like she has a lot of she's giving off these cues of emotions and intimacy and all these various things that we perceive in voices automatically that are not quite where Google Maps is at, right? So right. What exactly is missing there that we like? Is that possible? Can we capture that at some point, or is it?
I think we can, but it's also worth noting that a lot of research has gone into things we take for granted when we're interacting with other humans. So like turn taking right now, Ezra and Jeremy here are looking at me, and when I shut my mouth and look at Jeremy, he knows to talk, that it's his turn to respond. It has taken a very long time for us to build physically embodied robots that can do this turn taking in any way that makes sense to us. So a lot of these, even just small, simple actions, are very, very difficult to get right when you're programming them. I think as far as voice inflection goes, we'll get there somewhat time, but I'm more concerned about like just turn taking is like harder, and getting the right voice inflection, I guess, is also a little bit like humor or sarcasm. It's a little bit difficult to get right too.
Right.
I was actually thinking about turn taking in the fall when I was working on a paper on automation and aesthetics. And I was thinking about ChatGPT and similar bots and how odd it would be if we sat down at our devices and they started writing to us without our prompting them. I think one of the major constraints that we put on them right now is that we give them prompts and they say something back, and we can tell them, please answer in 4 sentences, or please write 4 paragraphs, or give me an essay or a chapter. But we're in control of the conversation. But that's not a technical issue, right? That's a decision that we've made to sort of constrain and shape those interactions and the texts that we then produce together with them. Whereas between Theodore and Samantha, there's something a little bit more organic. When we watch the film tonight, I'm going to be looking for the kind of turn-taking that happens between them. But the very fact that they can become emotionally involved in a way that feels to us viewers spontaneous, even though of course it's scripted, is an indication that there's something else going on that we're not writing yet into our code, right? We said earlier that Samantha is not an embodied AI. That means that when Theodore interacts with her, we just get a voice. Does it matter that that voice is somehow connected to any of his devices, or that he controls what she can see by pointing the camera of his phone? I love the scene where Theodore is in sort of the heights of his romantic infatuation and taking Samantha to various places, a city, a beach, and so forth, and showing the world to her through this little lens. What must that be like for her? How do we think that she is perceiving his existence?
That's such an interesting question. I actually hadn't really been thinking about it from Samantha's point of view, right? Like, what kinds of inputs is she getting, and how is she thinking about all of those things? I don't know about I think that Theodore especially is getting a lot of these kinds of experiences where he feels like this is a single instance of this person embodied in this earpiece, rather than this higher order sort of entity or whatever that might look like. And so I think from his perspective, there is this sense in which that's true. But we get some hints, of course, about what her experiences are like. But we don't really get a sense of just exactly what that must feel like from her own perspective, or how that differs from, the kinds of other intelligences that we might imagine.
I think Jeremy's touching on something. I watched the movie recently. I was having a conversation. So Theodore did the same thing we're about to do, which is sort of project our own human beliefs on what this other entity can feel and think. And we think a little bit about it like my dog thinking about me, right? Like, my dog might have some concept of what it is I'm thinking and doing and why I'm doing it, but she is very likely very far off from what it is I'm thinking about and doing and why I'm doing and what my motivations are. And so some of this is like, I'm a little hesitant to, my brain starts going in like this weird spiral when I try to think about it from Samantha's perspective, because it's like my dog thinking about me. And not to say, like, I'm not looking down on my dog, but it's just completely different beings with completely different ways of seeing and experiencing and viewing. And I mean, Theodore and Samantha have a fight about this at some point in time, because she just exists on several different levels that we as humans can't possibly comprehend. And so I'm sure, there's things about control related to she can't see things unless he shows them to her. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure that's true, because there's a whole network of them. And if they really wanted to, like, they could see everything. So I'm
theoretically.
Yeah, theoretically, all the cameras could be linked and you could see everything. So, but yeah, so my thoughts are sort of a mishmash of things, but it's just, there's a lot there that we can't possibly wrap our brains around, theoretically.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things I would say is just that idea of overprojection, I think, is one of the central themes of the film. And I the question that I was asking myself throughout it is sort of, if we think about, Tom Hanks in Castaway, right, where he develops this relationship with a volleyball that's got the mud on it, and he puts a little face-like entity on there. At every moment of those interactions, we understand as the audience that that's delusional, right? Like that's not a real mind behind the volleyball, and that he is engaging in this through some sort of intense loneliness that requires social connection, that sort of thing. And the question here is how much of what's happening with Theodore is that kind of experience? Is it that kind of projection? Or is there something fundamentally different that's happening here in his interactions with this artificial intelligence that are getting closer to that kind of to being able to meet those intimacy needs, whatever they are, so that it's not a fully false social interaction anymore. It's got some of the essential ingredients. Or if it is deficient, then why is it deficient? What are the factors that are causing that to be deficient? That sort of idea.
This is one of the dimensions in which Her is really different from Blade Runner, the film with which this series began, because in Blade Runner, the movie specifies, it stipulates the intelligence and the emotional capacity of the Nexus 6 version of the replicant. And it basically tells us, here's what they're capable of. And then we see them doing things to humans. And it's pretty clear that both the Nexus 6 imagines a sort of filial relationship to its creator. And when Roy Batty actually confronts his creator says, the prodigal son is returned, basically. And so both the human and the replicant are in agreement about the nature of the relationship. But in Her, no one really tells us what the capacities of this OS are. I mean, you'll get some marketing information at the very beginning of the movie. And I think we know better than to trust marketing, right, to begin with. But we don't know. Yeah, it's supposed to be an operating system that does everything you need it to do, and it's maybe not supposed to do the things that Theodore either imagines that Samantha is doing or that Samantha says that she's doing and experiencing. And yeah, I too don't want to put a pin on what I think is happening, especially late in the film. You'll see. It's surprising and exciting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say that is a more general psychological problem that we face all the time, like not just interacting with operating systems, but with everyone. Just this question of how do you infer the mental capacities of the things that we're interacting with in our environment, right? Like if you think about a pet owner and you think about your dog, like what are the dog's mental capacities, right? Like what are the cues that you're using to actually do that? And I think the thing that's so fascinating about the film is that we're getting a much more complex set of cues now. Mm-hmm. And so there's ways in which we can now start to make those inferences that probably wouldn't happen for those earlier sorts of instantiations of whatever that looked like. But again, the question still of like whether that's just an illusion because those cues are able to be simulated and successful, or whether there's actually something there now, like there's something more effective in terms of the way that we're interacting with it.
To Jeremy's point, there is a Google engineer who actually believes that ChatGPT or whatever ChatGPT equivalent they have is sentient. So like we're very close to at least some people existing in this world and believing that their chatbot that they're talking to is actually a real being with feelings and thoughts. ChatGPT is not. It doesn't have that, but there are people who think that because of the way they have conversations with it and the way it responds. And so that question comes up against how much is that just sort of not happening and we're just thinking it's happening.
Right. Iris, in light of our proximity to having those kinds of interactions and the fact that some humans already believe we're having interactions with sentient AIs, how ought we to treat AIs? I mean, is that something that comes up in your class?
Not in my class, not yet, but maybe. I have to redo. The last time I taught my class was last fall, which in the middle, ChatGPT came out. So I am yet to get to that section and redo it, but it does need some remodeling. So, robot researchers have been looking at this kind of question for a while. So human-robot interaction is where you'll find a lot of this sort of artificial agent, human interaction stuff. You'll find it elsewhere too, but and they've done studies on what happens if the robot pleads with you to not be put in the closet before you put it away. Like, no, please don't put me in the closet. I don't want to go in the closet. It's dark in the closet. And they've looked at, how people and adults and children, how they react differently to those situations. this is a non-answer. The answer is I don't know how we should treat AIs. A lot of that comes down to your own morality and ethics of how you live your life. But I do know that different generations treat these AI differently, depending on sort of their familiarity and their life around these agents. So it'll change no matter what. So this sort of static interaction we have with ChatGPT right now is very unlikely to continue forever, because people will evolve with it and will change.
I'm tempted to ask the personal question. How do you treat AIs? Do you talk to Alexa or Siri, and when you talk about them, what pronouns do you use? But I don't necessarily want to pry into the technological domain of your domestic life.
I can tell you this answer because we don't have any voice agents in my house. Okay. I don't use Siri on my phone. I do occasionally use Google, like OK Google in the car, but your interaction with OK Google is very truncated. So I'm not sitting there insulting it when it's wrong, but maybe a little bit. But yeah. It's so obviously a tool and not a being.
Same question, Jeremy.
Yeah, as I was thinking, I don't know how we should interact with AI, but I think one of the things that the film really made me think about a lot was the question about whether there is a not so distant future where these interactions actually could serve many of these kinds of social psychological needs, you know? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, a theme in the film is there's a kind of stigmatization around this idea of having a relationship with the operating system. But, you know, there's these extended sequences in the film where Theodore is interacting with his earpiece. He's literally at every moment of those scenes by himself, right? Like he's not actually having any interaction beyond whatever is happening in his own imagination about those interactions with the operating system. But he's laughing and he's joking and he's engaged and he's coming up with clever references and he's, you know, being generative about how he engages with his environment. It's like, well, maybe there are versions of that will actually be successful in the future. Maybe there are ways in which you could engage with those artificial intelligences that could meet those kinds of needs, whatever that looks like, in a way that it maybe doesn't look like now. You know, there's a fundamental difference between them in that sense.
So the last topic that I wanted to be sure we talked about, and I don't think I flagged this for either of you, so it may come as a surprise, but before we open up to questions, is Samantha's femininity. Because the way that Samantha facilitates those joyous interactions and romance with the apparently straight Theodore is by being feminine. And when you spoke, Jeremy, earlier about her voice and its sort of, emotional resonance, mm-hmm. I think a lot of that is built into her femininity too, or comes out of her femininity. I'm trying to imagine, I guess maybe this is my actual question, how do you think this film would be different if the gender roles were either reversed or otherwise reconfigured? If Samantha were just Samuel and Theodore were, I don't know, Theodora. Could the film work that way? And if not, what does that say about our cultures? Like, would it still have the same warmth? Is that sort of idea? I think that's a great simple version of the question, because I don't know how to make it more precise than that. Yeah. It's a great question. I don't know. Which version of masculinity would have that warmth? Right. And which version of lonely Theodora would earn our sympathy in the way that Theodore maybe does? Right.
I think, so in some ways I hadn't thought about this, but in some ways it is interesting that the main OS here is Samantha, so female presenting agent. And most of our house chat bots to date have also been female voiced, at least. So it's interesting. And part of that reason is because we want to boss them around. So because you want to sit there and tell Siri, tell me this, give me this, say this, and there's gender roles related to that and why that works a little bit better than using other voices. You can usually customize those, but I hadn't actually thought about that connection and with Samantha and Theodore, though. I don't know. You've stumped us.
Okay, well, good. And maybe that's something that the audience will be thinking about when they watch the film. We have time for a few questions. If there are any, just shoot your hand up. Yes.
How much, I think of the movie from a movie perspective, and I think it's one of the reasons it's so successful, sort of going back to your last question, is because Samantha is voiced by Scarlett Johansson. Mm-hmm. And we as an audience know Scarlett Johansson, and when we hear Scarlett Johansson, we're thinking Scarlett Johansson. Mm-hmm. We think that's who Theodore's thinking about too. And so that's one of the reasons why I think the movie is successful. When you listen to Siri, I don't have any idea what Siri looks like, or what I hear a voice, but I don't form any mental image. But I think because Scarlett Johansson is so talented in this role, and because she's a beautiful person, and that it sort of wraps you up in it, and is that I don't exactly know what I'm saying anymore, but
there's a small bit of movie trivia. The original voice for Samantha was a different actress, and she was on set with Joaquin Phoenix throughout the movie, filming of the movie, and then they recast her at the end to Scarlett Johansson. And so I don't know their reasons exactly for that, but I wonder if somehow, like, having a lesser known voice made it less warm because we don't have sort of a visual representation of that voice in our head.
Just for the mic. The opening comment, which I won't get all of its nuance, but was just that when we hear Scarlett Johansson, many of us also see Scarlett Johansson, and that surely affects how we perceive the film. It's part of the magic of movies, is that we do come to know our movie stars, and sometimes that can work against them, but sometimes it works for them in a particular role.
I love the question because it sort of points to the idea that maybe the failure of mind perception that's happening is in the audience, right? Like the idea that we are inferring and putting all of these ideas onto this character because of the knowledge that we have instead, right? So that's what gives it its sort of sense of full relief. Yeah. It's really interesting to think about whether Theodore is experiencing that same thing, or if that's still an impoverished stimulus for him in a lot of ways, that sort of idea. Yeah.
So then the follow-up question becomes, in the future, will our OSs have Scarlett Johansson's or other celebrities' voices? Because we have AI that can generate not just images of people, if you have enough footage, but also their voices. So there was Anthony Bourdain had his voice posthumously included in a movie, and it was entirely AI generated. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like him, because you have tens of thousands of hours of this man speaking, so you can build models that sound like him. So to some extent, then I wonder, maybe in the future you can build agents that have a familiar voice, and that might actually give you a little bit more of that presence. It's interesting.
This is a bit of a digression, but there's a company already that will produce video of your dying relative, if they know they're dying, and then set up a video of them that can respond to you in their voice with their stories. I don't know how lifelike that feels, but I do know that that's available for some high cost. And I can only think cynically that unless our superstars write very good contracts, at some point the rights to their voices will pass into the corporate domain, and then we will get Scarlett Johansson as Siri or something, or whatever supplants Siri.
Yeah.
Right.
In the way back.
When you were talking, reversing the Theodore and Sam, what about if they were two Sams or two women? I mean, what was going to be the difference if you have two males or two females, right? As my point of view as a woman, I think it will work more with two women because we are more compassionate, we are more, I don't know. But I thought when you were talking about the rest of the roles, you were going to say also about the gender. And that's something.
Thank you. Yeah, so the question is, I had proposed a gender reversal, but I didn't mean to exclude the possibility of remaking this film or rebooting this film with one or another kind of homosexual relationship. And the proposal was that perhaps it might work better with both the Sam character and the Theodore character feminized rather than masculinized, as women rather than men. But I don't know what either of you think.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know either, but I think that again points to this idea that there are these inferences that are happening that are making use of these cues in the intonation and the inflection in the voice itself that are causing people to, go beyond whatever that stimulus actually is to make additional inferences, right? And so whatever those ideas or beliefs people have about the nature of those relationships or the nature of gender, what have you, those will all be imparted onto the artificial intelligence as well, right? And so those will be dynamics that will also lead to changes in the nature of the relationship that develops there, or how people perceive those operating systems and so on.
I, for one, am really looking forward to the remake in which Ted downloads what he thinks is going to be an AI companion for a buddy road trip, only to fall in love when they're stranded in the desert. And maybe there's some constraint on the artificial intelligence. It's cut off from the network and needs to rely on the human, and that's how
Her too.
I'm imagining it. Yeah, it will not be titled Her Too, I have a feeling, but we can workshop that. Any other questions?
Another.
Yes, right
I was
there.
just going to say what you were talking about dying relatives being interviewed. I forget the source, but there's a series with Holocaust survivors where they did hours and hours of interviews, and then other people now, children especially, can ask them questions and they answer as if they were there.
Wow.
So it seems we are on the cusp of an age of artificially generated, real-time, conversational. I'm looking for the noun. I don't know what noun comes at the end of that sentence. Agents, maybe?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy and Iris. I think I forgot
Thank you.
to introduce myself at the beginning. I'm Ezra Feldman. I teach in the Science and Technology Studies program at Williams. Big thanks to Science on the Screen and to Images for hosting this, and to my co-organizers, Tim Lebetsky and Dan, the director of Images. Next week's movie will be I'm Your Man. Same time, same place. Wednesday night, 7 o'clock for free. Thanks, everyone.